So will the changes do what the feds want them to politically? Let's bring in the front bench. Former senior advisor to the Liberal Ontario governments of Dalton McGuinty and Kathleen Wynne, Dan Moulton is here. He's now a partner with Crestview Strategy. Shakir Chambers worked in Prime Minister Stephen Harper's office before becoming a policy advisor to the International Trade Minister. He's now a principal at Earnscliffe Strategies. Kathleen Monk is the former director of communications to the late Jack Layton. She's now the principal owner of Monk & Associates. And Laura Stone is a Queen's Park reporter with the Globe and Mail. Hello, everybody. So the legislation, Dan, won't actually come until the fall, but this is a motion very clearly meant to make the Tories decide one way or the other, I think is a fair assessment.
Yeah, I mean, it's an enabling motion. They've set legislation this summer. It's not a brief motion, though. It's 50 pages, yeah. So it's not as though it's a tight document. This is a pretty significant policy statement that outlines a lot of things people have been waiting on since the budget was released. You know, I agree what you're saying. I think there is a convenient instrument here for the Liberals in terms of forcing a vote from the Conservatives to take a stance on this. It looks to me in that statement and some of the other statements from Conservative MPs today as though they may choose to vote against the motion for the first time. It surprises me too. And it surprises me because they clearly think, if you read that statement, that they can convince Canadians that this is bad news. The polling is very clear on this. I mean, the Liberals have polling, the Conservatives must have the same polling, which indicates that 60% of Canadians support this measure. And that's pretty strong result from pretty much anything else that you saw in the budget. That's a pretty strong endorsement from Canadians. And so I will be very surprised if they choose to vote against. I don't think that the Conservatives will be able to convince people that this is a negative change. And I think they're playing right into the Liberals' hands on that one.
It's so interesting, Kathleen, because I feel like it's a lot of things are true at once. I think that it depends on the poll, the degree to which people are supportive, but at least half of Canadians in most polls are somewhat supportive of the measure. At the same time, you've got, my radio show was insane today with people who are not wealthy calling in about the ways in which this will impact them. You've got doctors worried about how this is going to impact them. So a lot of louder voices on the side. And then the third thing that's true is that this, like, I would never have bet that the Conservatives were going to release the statement they did today. I thought that they would play this like the anti-scab legislation, recognize it for the wedge it potentially is, and not go with it. But that statement made me think that they might vote against it.
Yeah, what's politically interesting is the point that both you and Dan have picked up on, that the Conservatives haven't been trying to precondition folks on how they would vote until today. And that statement today did make some kind of, lean the evidence towards maybe they will vote against it. But I would be surprised still, because they've been so disciplined, like on the anti-scab, which was antithetical to their actual values, But the math on this strategically is pretty simple. Like, it really is 40,000 Canadians will be impacted by this. 31 million, the other bunch of people that pay taxes, when you take out the kids and those that don't pay taxes, aren't going to be impacted by it. I mean, I
will say that math is up for dispute. There's a lot of economists who say that, okay, that's the one-time impact, but that people don't recognize capital gains on an annual basis, right? They might, in this instance, in another instance.
For sure, and I could win the million.
It's a lot smaller
I could
than the
win
rest
the
of the
lotto
country.
tomorrow, and hopefully I do. If someone wants to give me a cottage or a nice house or a rental property, and I could maybe be caught up in these things too. But I think what's interesting to me is in watching Freeland, right? Who's kind of, this is the minister who once wrote a book called Plutocrats, right? Who wrote about the global elite and the rich, but had no solutions on how to rein them in. And now she's come up with this plan, and she's out there voicing it so strongly, but she's the wrong messenger for the Liberals. We can't take her seriously because, frankly, even the policies they put forward on capital gains aren't going to do enough. Of course, New Democrats are going to support them, but New Democrats called for capital gains to go up to 75% and also actually asked for a corporate tax increase as well,
wealth
right?
Tax,
wealth tax,
yeah.
Excess profits tax. But the thing is, this is almost like a deathbed conversions for the Liberals. What can we do now to creep a little bit more left and maybe pick up a few people who they don't already have in their voter base?
I feel like we have to show I think what you're referencing, which is the initial press conference from the finance minister. She held it yesterday, and it was, I think, what's garnering a ton of attention and what you're alluding to is the way in which she framed the issue, which is not a way that I've ever heard her in the past frame it, at least in this degree. Have a listen to the clip, and then we'll get Shakir and Laura to weigh in.
Do you want to live in a country where kids go to school hungry? Do you want to live in a country where a teenage girl gets pregnant just because she doesn't have the money to buy birth control? Do you want to live in a country where those at the very top live lives of luxury, but must do so in gated communities, behind ever higher fences, using private health care and airplanes, because the public sphere is so degraded and the wrath of the vast majority of their less privileged compatriots burns so hot.
Shakir, I'll get your take on that first.
I mean, it's interesting. I mean, she's framing it as, I think before the beginning of that crypt, she says, what kind of Canada do you want to live in? And it makes you kind of scratch your head because they've been in power for about 10 years. So the Canada we're living in is a Canada they kind of created. So all these issues she's listing, they've kind of happened on the Liberals' watch. So I'm not sure what she's trying to get at. And so putting this forth as like this capital gains tax is a solution to all these issues. I mean, the question that I would have is if this is the answer, why didn't you do this 2 or 3 years ago? Why now? And so I really think on this particular issue, the Liberals are overplaying their hand on this, both with the rhetoric they're putting out there, but also with a lot of Canadians who are going to look at this and say, you know what, it's a little bit too little, too late. It's not going to be this silver bullet you think it's going to be moving forward. But I mean, Freeland's rhetoric was quite a bit on that. I've just never heard her speak in that kind of way. And it kind of made me chuckle a bit just to hear her talk in this contrast of what Canada looks like now. Again, they've been in power for almost a decade. So these issues are some of the issues that they've created on their watch.
I can hear Dan wants to jump in. I'm going to get Laura, and then I'll get Dan's response. Laura, who do you think she is trying to speak to when she made those comments?
I would characterize the comments as a little over the top, but that's just me in framing the issue. Look, I think she's trying to talk to young people, to young voters, to middle class people who feel like they're not getting ahead. I think that speech wasn't exactly just about capital gains. It was about pharmacare. It was about some other measures that the Liberal government is doing. So they're trying to kind of package this all as through their narrative of fairness in their budget. And so I think it's young voters, it's millennials, it's people who in the GTA who are working their butts off and who can barely scrape by each month, and they're treating this as a panacea to their problems. I think it's politically savvy to put the pressure on the Conservatives on this one, just because they've so rarely had to actually make any choices and be accountable for decisions. They've profited so much on the Liberal government's struggle. So in that sense, I think it's a one-up for the Liberals. I just question whether, this issue is going to resonate in the way that the Liberals want it to. I mean, try explaining this at your dinner table in 30 minutes or less. It's not exactly, it's pretty hard to kind of punch through. And so I actually view it as sort of a niche thing. I know the Liberals are saying they're going to raise a ton of revenue from it that will help pay for programs. But I think the people that it impacts them a lot, and they're very upset about it. And I think for everyone else, I'm just not sure that it kind of that the Liberals can tell the story that they want through this, either because it's so far gone and people have kind of left them behind, or maybe there's a lack of believability about how this particular increase is going to solve everyone's problems.
Who do you think the finance minister was communicating to, and why do you think at this juncture she chose to frame it in the way she did, Dan?
Well, I mean, she was speaking to Liberal voters, and those were very deliberate words. She was reading from a teleprompter yesterday. That was a pre-written speech that was not off the cuff. She had prepared those remarks, and her team had prepared those remarks. They want to be talking about this issue. Speaking to senior folks in the government today on this topic, this is one they want to keep talking about. What they're finding in the data is that the more Canadians hear about this policy, the more they support it. So there's a trend in which if you hear and learn more about what the capital gains tax increases mean, you're more likely to support it. And where I fundamentally disagree with Laura, and why I think the government's wise to continue talking about this, and why I think it would be quite foolish for the Conservatives to vote against it, is that this is really easy to describe at the dinner table. Capital gains is a $250,000 word. It is something rich people care about. This is about increasing taxes on the wealthiest, and if moms across the country are able to think about it in that context and talk to their families about it in that context, they're more likely to vote Liberal in the next election.
The only thing I totally understand that point. I take that point. The only thing I would sort of jump off Laura's is, or even Shakir's is, if you're saying, Kathleen, that this is necessary in order to fix the ailments that this country is suffering through, like, isn't it more difficult to say we're the only ones who can do that with this thing that only we will do, when you have presided over the country.
Not at all. I mean, these problems of underinvestment date back to the 80s, right? In terms of lack of investment in our housing, lack of investment in our social programs and our healthcare systems. These didn't just crop up in the last 8-9 years. This has been underfunding that's been happening since, you could go back to frankly Mulroney, when he had the capital gains tax actually at 75%, and then it was successive conservative governments under Harper, et cetera, that lowered it, right, to what it is now. But I got to give credit a little bit to Ms. Freeland, because she had a great line yesterday that will punch through to Dan's point that if they can actually get it out to their audiences, which is why is it that a wealthy investor will pay less tax than, say, a nurse or a plumber? And that's not fairness. That's favoritism. And that line, which she delivered, that's not my coin, that's hers, that she used
but
yesterday.
they don't have the data necessarily to back that up. Well,
what do you mean? Of course they do.
How have they presented that?
We know that people who flip burgers every day, they pay tax on every dollar they make. If you're flipping a house or if you're flipping your stocks, you're not paying the same rate of tax as that guy who's flipping burgers. That is fundamentally unfair.
They're small business owners.
Fundamentally favoritism.
Yes, Shakir, go ahead.
There are small business owners in Canada who don't have a company pension, right? Who use the sales proceeds to invest in something like maybe real estate to fund their retirement. They're going to get dinged pretty hard on this, and this is they don't view this as fair.
Let him finish.
Right?
Let him finish.
They're not millionaires. They're not the 1%. The way that the government's framing this is only targeting the 1% is false. It's just completely false. There are people who are not millionaires who are just trying to get by, who are middle-class business owners, who are going to get dinged pretty hard, and their retirement is going to get ruined by the capital gains increase. And I think you need to grapple with that reality. Don't just ask me. Ask folks out there. I'm sure Vassy has gotten these comments on her show. The last time we spoke about this topic 4 weeks ago, I got a series of emails just from small business owners talking about the specific policy. So this is not make-believe. I think the way the government's talking about this issue is just not factual.
Okay, go. You have like 20 seconds.
Well, I'll just say, I think, first of all, that's why there are lifetime exemptions for small business shares and why there are more than $1 million, first of all, to that point. And second of all, I think it will be interesting to see what the government comes out with this summer in terms of their entrepreneurs incentive that they're designing. I think we're going to see more there on the tech sector, the mining sector, in terms of the work that they're doing on the policy front to develop exemptions for people that work in those spaces.
Yeah,
let's do another segment on retirement security. We can talk about pensions with Shakir and how actually we shouldn't be using real estate investment as our pensions.
I know, but people have. That's the point.
Well,
There's a man who's
has been a failure.
on the radio
There has
today,
been a failure in terms of being able to provide retirement.
Okay, but that doesn't mean that it doesn't happen.
It does, but the thing is, we should be using homes are shelter. They should not necessarily only be for our retirement security.
That's a utopia that doesn't exist right now.
Well, let's create it, Vassy.
Okay,
let's create it.
there we go. I got to take a quick break. We got to turn to foreign interference with our front bench next. Stay right there.